Welcome back to DissedMedia, a startup story, the podcast where I take you along our journey of starting DissedMedia from the ground up. You get to hear all about our challenges and accomplishments as we either grow DissedMedia or go bust. Either way, you're going to have a front row seat to hear it all. And along the way, we're going to have some special guests who share with us their wisdom and insights and what helped them along their startup journey to success. So get ready as we get into it and try to help those get better at what they do. Welcome back, everybody, to DissedMedia, a startup story, the podcast where we take you behind the scenes of starting a podcast or business, I should say, from the ground up. Boy, you know what? We're having a good time just messing up here along the way, but we're going to keep rolling with this take. We have another special guest here today, somebody who is an expert at starting businesses and not only starting them, but using a technique called nearshoring to help scale those businesses and take advantage of some of the things that many of us struggle with when working with a business. One, capital is precious and startup money is precious. And so anytime that we can save on one of the biggest costs of a business, which is labor, that is always an amazing thing. And so here to help share some of his insights about nearshoring, about starting businesses, about scaling, is Brian Samson. Brian, how are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for having me and the opportunity to talk nearshoring with your audience.
One of the things that I like to try and get into as we get into these things is understanding a little bit more about you, your background, kind of what brought you to this, because becoming an expert in nearshoring in Latin America isn't necessarily something that a lot of people just have a lot of history with, right? I'm sure maybe your parents probably weren't in this side of business. And so very curious, how did you get started in this? And how did you tap into Latin America as an opportunity?
So I grew up in the Midwest, just outside Chicago. Didn't really know any entrepreneurs. My dad worked for the same company for 30 plus years. It was really not part of what I knew. Fast forward a decade later, I was living in San Francisco and working as a head of talent, which is a fancy San Francisco title to say, in charge of talent acquisition. But I had exposure to all these VC funded tech companies that I'm sure your audience is super familiar with, and they would raise a bunch of capital and accelerate. And that's really where I came in. When I first arrived on scene there, I felt totally intimidated, overwhelmed. Everybody went to Stanford and Berkeley and MIT, and I just went to some state school in Illinois. And it took me a little while to gain my confidence. But after around 5 years there, I thought, okay, I think I got this. There was a really funny time where this is probably 2014, 2015, so about 10 years ago. And I met my wife a few years prior to that in San Francisco. She grew up as the daughter of an expat. So she was living all over Japan, Korea, Guam, England growing up. And I had this kind of sheltered Midwest childhood. And I thought that was fascinating. Wow, I want to be an expat. So I started looking at places where I could do my MBA and become an expat, but not in Latin America. That wasn't even on the radar. I wanted to be an expat in Asia. And ended up getting into National University of Singapore, joint program with UCLA in California. And I thought, this is my ticket. I'm going to work as an expat in the glitzy skyline of Singapore or Shanghai or something like that. And I had reached out to this guy that I knew from my San Francisco days, who was a big shot in Shanghai. And I reached out thinking my program in Singapore was like the key to the city here. And I would love to work for you. I'm ready to move to Shanghai. Let's do it. And his first question was, "How's your Mandarin?" I don't speak Mandarin. And and he's like, "Well, come back with me. Come back to me with an idea. I like your initiative. Come back to me with a better idea." So I started looking at what was happening in San Francisco at the time. Huge gold rush around fintechs, but there was a pattern that I saw in that there were lots of fintechs in San Francisco, New York. They were really founded by finance guys who had access to capital, pretty good product visions, and they were kind of agnostic about how their MVP, their minimum viable products, were launched. I'm like, okay, I think I can build something where we can do the MVPs for these fintechs and kind of drew it all up, total addressable market, figured out how to do discounted cash flow and all these things you do when you build your pitch deck. So I came back to the guy in Shanghai and said, okay, what do you think about this idea? And he liked it. He agreed to fund it. So raised about $2 million, kept sales in San Francisco. But $2 million, as your audience knows, felt like a lot of money for a Midwest kid, but it doesn't get you very far in San Francisco. I started looking at the map and decided on Argentina. So came home one day and told my wife, who just a couple months ago was like picturing this vision of high rises in Asia and all the energy of that. And what do you think about moving to Argentina? And she had to remind herself where it was on the map. But we didn't have any kids. We've got a couple now, but no kids and no real attachments. And we went for it. We got the expat experience just in the totally other side of the world. We moved to Buenos Aires, which is the mega city down there. There's 14 million people. Looks like maybe Paris did 50 years ago. Tree-lined streets, beautiful architecture, but also a ton of chaos and craziness and volatility. And give it a go. And 10 years later, I've been in the nearshoring world and happy to dive more into that. But that's how it all got started.
Did you experience any language barriers there?
Yeah. So I had what I would call restaurant Spanish before I moved there. Growing up in the Midwest, I worked at a couple of restaurants to pay for did this on high school breaks and college breaks and paid for college that way. So I knew all my way around like ordering food and making food and a few curse words you might learn in the
Yeah.
restaurant. But that's about
Right.
it. So when we live there, English is pretty prevalent, but it's not prevalent everywhere. So you learn taxi cab directions, you learn restaurant stuff, how to get around, how to navigate the city. But the workforce, wow, like their English was not like you call a call center maybe in Asia and you're connected to United Airlines call center and it feels like this scripted English and you're not really sure if they understand your slang or what you're saying. Sure, we both speak the same language, but it's not like my English. But that wasn't the case at all in Argentina. I felt like they knew pop culture English and Netflix English and could speak the slang and the colloquialisms and the idioms. And I could say, go take a hike, and they're not grabbing their backpack. They understand what that means. So the English level was way beyond advanced. It was like native American style English. And I didn't really have to practice my Spanish a whole lot. I got by easy on my English during the workday.
If you don't mind me asking, so it was a fintech company that kind of brought you down there, but you've scaled a couple companies in your time. So this, I take, was the
That was the
first
first.
one
Yep.
that you brought along. What was the thing about working in Argentina, and are there other Latin countries that you've tapped
Yeah.
into? But what was the thing about Argentina that kind of made that $2 million thrive a little bit more?
So a couple things that I noticed about Argentina, maybe in my pitch deck, and then there's some of the things that I noticed when I was on the ground. So on the pitch deck stuff, Argentina has high English availability. They've been exporting software workers for a good dozen years before I'd even been there. Companies like MuleSoft and Salesforce, and they had Mercado Libre, which is like the Amazon of Latin America. So I don't want to pretend that I'm Christopher Columbus here and like I discovered Argentina, but so they had a lot of things that were going for it. But here's what made me fall in love with it, the workforce, and really made a career out of it. And then I'll answer your question about other Latin America countries. If you're in a hiring role, and I'm sure a vast majority of your audience, founders, startup executives, startup leaders, they're hiring people all the time. And if I were to ask them, how would you feel about hiring somebody that was gritty, scrappy, calm under chaos, clever, critical thinkers, humble? Man, like you're checking all the boxes of all the things that I'd want. We often overlook countries like Argentina and Venezuela, Colombia, and Mexico because what we see on Netflix, shows like Narcos and newspaper headlines and breadlines in Venezuela. We hear about crazy inflation in Argentina and cartels and drugs. That's not the people, that's the government, the institution. So don't judge the population by what you are maybe reading as the headline in the newspaper. So when you live under these kind of conditions, you become really scrappy. You understand how to navigate wild volatility that's outside of your control and not be stressed out by it. You understand how to find really creative solutions to complicated problems. And that's what made me fall in love with Latin America and the population there, is stuff that would totally throw me off and my friends off in the States is a Tuesday for them. And they just get used to it. They figure it out. They move on to the next problem. And I love that. That's what really made me fall in love with it. And some of the other countries that I think with Plug, which is my large company today, we've got about 100 people. We are biggest in Mexico. I think we've got 66, 67 people in Mexico today. And Mexico has been a fantastic place. It's easy to get to, educated population. You've got major cities with Monterrey, Guadalajara, of course, Mexico City, expat haven, a lot of great things going for it. But again, if you can look beyond that scary newspaper headline and recognize all the benefits people get out of being in challenging situations, you too can take advantage of that.
It's interesting that you say that. It's as if you lived outside of the United States and you only heard crime stories from some of the biggest cities in America, and you would think, oh my God, the whole place has got to be crazy. But once you get into the interior of it, once you get into the people, I love what you said, that it is it's the government, it's the media, it's not the people. And it's something that I find often is that people are great. It's all the people
Yep.
above that are supposed to be in control, that create a lot of the chaos. What's interesting what you said about scrappy, right? So big fan of Angela Duckworth, and she's done a lot of work around grit. And, just kind of having that ability to see through adversity and have a stick-to-itiveness about things to make sure that you don't allow things to get too crazy, right? I love that, you've kind of tapped into the spirit of that. Even my own family, my dad is second generation. My relatives come from Guadalajara, and very true about just kind of persevering through. I was just talking yesterday to my wife about how, like, my dad was never sick. Like he never got a cold. I don't ever remember him calling in sick from work and not going to work because he didn't feel like he just didn't have that in him.
I think it came
Yeah.
at a period of time where, I was at a startup in San Francisco. I was on the executive team, and we were running out of money, which is the death of a lot of tech companies. We just couldn't seem to raise, and we had to cut a bunch of our contractors. So, between like a Friday and a Monday, cut like 15 people, which was large in a company of 50. And I remember going into work that Monday morning, and the team was complaining that we cut the hummus budget in the micro kitchen. And like, I was,
Forget about the 15 people that are no longer around, right? It's the hummus
and I
that
was just
matters.
exasperated. People have it way worse in the world, and they can grind, and they're scrappy, and they're gritty, and they can overcome challenges. And what's going on here? It's just entitled and bratty. And so being able to spend a lot of time in Latin America, you're around people that are grateful, and they have gratitude for opportunities, and they're grateful for challenges, because that's something to be grateful for too. And it was just a great rewire for me.
With what you do today, with your company that you're running today, tell us a little bit about what you're doing currently and a little bit about how you're
Yeah,
staffed up.
so Plug is a nearshore staffing agency. So we'll work with companies everywhere from early stage to mid stage tech startups to middle market companies. And a lot of times they're looking for labor arbitrage. In a post COVID world, most of my conversations now are around time zone. People want their teams, they want the staff that they hire to be able to collaborate with them, jump on a quick Zoom call, go back and forth on Asana Monday, back and forth with real time. And they want quick feedback.
And they don't want to be up at 3 a.m. while it's
Yeah, like the dollars you save by waiting till the next morning to get your response just isn't worth the cost savings anymore. It's not worth the headaches
yeah.
or anything else. And this is not a diss on Asia. There's a lot of great, talented people out there. And there's a lot of people that are more than willing to work at 3 o'clock in the morning, their time, to match US hours. But that's not normal. It's not natural. It's nice when people are on the same natural time zone. Our body clocks are all synced. So,
When you talk about a startup too, speed and efficiency
yeah.
are crucial, right? So even waiting 6 hours because you're waiting for that time lapse to occur, that can be some precious lost time, especially when you have systems that are down or
Oh,
things that need to
man,
be executed
absolutely.
quickly.
Yeah. The sense of urgency that startups have is like nothing else. You've got that. You've got that right there with nearshoring. So we are basically talent brokers. We've got a whole infrastructure of recruiters, operations people, HR people, legal, payroll, all of that in Latin America. But we're also a US entity, so US contracts. There's no crazy wire transfers or anything like that. So companies that are looking for labor arbitrage, again, they're not looking for the cheapest talent in the world, because I'd still recommend Asia for that. But if you're looking for the best value for talent, that's where Latin America is the best, what we call labor arbitrage, where maybe you're paying a little more than Asia, a little less than the US, but that value you're getting far exceeds the amount you're paying. Same time zone, good English, all the other attributes we talked about earlier. We're connecting companies in the US with talent in Latin America that they normally wouldn't have access to, because this talent's not on Upwork and Fiverr. They're sharp, and they're recruited just like we're recruiting hard to find data engineers and AI engineers in the States.
I think one thing that is really got to be careful how I position this because I'm going to be offensive. I'm sure. But I tend to have a bit of a motor on me. I don't like to have idle hands. I keep myself busy doing a lot of stuff. And in other shows, I've talked about all the things that I keep myself involved in. And just this weekend, I've been working on scaling up a web app for a company that I work with, and literally have spent 16 hours Saturday and Sunday, like just did not move from my office, just burning it, right? And I got up this morning. The first thing I did was picked up the laptop, started at it again, and I'm probably after this, I'll be at it even longer. I don't really have this. I always talk about this when I teach. I'm like, I don't have work-life balance. I just have work life, and it just. I don't really say like there's a time that I'm off. I don't really count my days off. I don't look forward to a particular day because it means I don't work anymore. I just have this that like I got things to do and I do it. But I can't tell you the number of times that I run into people stateside who just don't have that motor in them. And my whole philosophy has always been, if you're not going to go at 100 miles an hour now, when are you? Well, I mean, because when is there a better time than when you're healthy and full of energy and can do it? Right? And I have a feeling that a lot of the people that you work with probably embrace that more than they do worrying about burnout and being stressed out. And and I'm not saying that you should work yourself to death, but there's probably less complaining about hours.
I think that's a great opportunity to maybe talk about a myth, because you might be thinking, don't they just take a bunch of siestas in Latin America and they're off the clock between noon and 4? Maybe in the very warm provinces or Caribbean. But these major urban cities like Mexico City, Buenos Aires, Sao Paulo, Lima.
They head to dinner at like 9 and 10 o'clock.
That's another great point, is they're working and they have this thing. Let me actually show you. This is called a mate cup. So you can get this in a place like Argentina, and you have this bombicho, which is a straw. But it's essentially a tea. So they'll have lunch at noon, and they won't eat again till 9. And they'll just be sucking on this kind of tea that is 10 times more powerful than coffee. And they're just boom, cranking stuff out for 9 hours. And then they get hungry and have their giant steak.
Yeah. It's I want to circle back to something that you mentioned earlier about payment, because I know from working with a friend of mine, he had a fintech startup. Funny that you mentioned that, but they would have a problem paying people in Brazil, for example, because you have to have kind of some residency in Brazil. It's really hard to just send money, wire money to people, especially if they're kind of contract people. Do you find any other countries that you work with that are challenging like that, or how do you get around those challenges with a country like Brazil? Or do you even work with Brazil?
We do work with Brazil. So I think there's been a tremendous amount of improvement in employer of record and payroll companies since I first started. I'll just share 2 funny examples. I think the very first time that I had somebody in Latin America, I realized, I don't know if I know how to pay. I don't know if I can probably pay them yet, because I was waiting to get my entity set up. So I'm like running around trying to figure out, like, can I just do Western Union? Kind of something like that. But maybe a funnier example is probably 10 years ago when I was just getting going in there. My wife and I were in Buenos Aires, which at the time was very difficult to get dollars. And no one wanted the local currency, the peso, because you're losing value, losing 10, 20% every month. And it was wild. And there's a street called Florida Street where it's cambio, like they'll change pesos for dollars. Uruguay is right next door to Argentina. And if you don't know, Uruguay is like the Switzerland for Latin America. It's safe, stable. major banks, easy transactions, and totally opposite of its neighbors, Brazil and Argentina, which are loud and difficult to do business in. So I would tell my wife, hey, it's Friday, why don't we take a little romantic trip to Colonia, Uruguay, or Montevideo, Uruguay? And we would enjoy ourselves and have a nice dinner, walk the Rambla. But every couple hours, I'm hitting the ATMs and the banks and maxing out my US dollars so I could come back to Argentina with, a big stack of USD to pay. Now, this is a dated example, so I don't want to scare your audience. This is um, the modern sophistication today with companies like Multiplier, Deal, Oyster, Payoneer, Wise. It could not be easier to pay people. There's employer of record services where people can be employees, like true employees. There's structures where you can set them up as contractors, but it has never been easier. And I'd recommend any of those payment companies.
So, with the work that you're doing now, you can help people not just with contract labor, but also with like company affiliated labor
Yeah. Yeah, there's
as
something
well.
that is kind of becoming an interesting trend that we can do. It's called Build, Operate, Transfer, also known as BOT. So let's say you're a company, and if there's anything your audience can agree, it's these last 5 years have been about as unpredictable as the last 5 years of any 5 year period I can think of. COVID, tech bull run, tech crash, tariffs, you name it.
It's, yeah, we've all been
Yeah,
there for
we've
the
all been
ride.
there for the ride. I'll say in 2021, 2022, the CFOs were in the background, but now after all the volatility, CFOs are forefront in most negotiations with any vendor. It doesn't matter if you're selling software or services. So CFOs want, above all, optionality, flexibility, because you never know what's going to come around the corner. So with Build, Operate, Transfer, it allows a vendor to set up an office for them, set up all the hardware, all the payroll, all the legal, all the compliance, and fill 20 seats, 50 seats, 200 seats, however many people they want to hire. And usually after a 2 to 3 year period, that company then has the optionality to absorb, set up their own entity, and basically inherit, take over everything that you as the vendor set up for them, basically buy out all the contracts for all the team members. But let's say it's a wild year 2 years from now and it's really volatile again, or there's a pandemic, or who knows. It's just like an option. They can say no and keep it going as is. So that's something that if you're maybe a little further along and you want all the benefits of a large nearshore team, co-located office, everything, we can do that. A lot of companies can do that. And you have this flexibility that I think a lot of us are looking for nowadays.
Who are your biggest clients right now? Is it still primarily startup companies or people just looking for different options? Like, how would you classify who your clients are
Yeah,
today?
we still very much will work with tech startups because I think the thing that's on their mind, and by the way, like I probably wouldn't hire my very first engineer outside of my city, or maybe even my second, but we're really there to exist. Once you've got your core team, scaling so you can preserve your runway. If you can get two engineers for the price of one in Latin America and you don't lose the time zone, you get all the attributes, that's really what you're going after when you're a tech startup, because you want that collaboration. The other type of customer, because I should say the other type of customer that we service is the one that's a little further along and they're looking for a company that knows what they're doing, so they're mitigating risk. And we've been lucky enough to have been there for a long time. I was an expat, like we talked about, in Argentina. My partner was an expat in Monterrey, Mexico. He lives in Atlanta full time. So we have seen it firsthand. Our value add is really advisors, on which is the right city and country based on the type of hardware that you need, getting around customs, talent pockets, labor cost, volatility, currency, all these different things. We can talk firsthand about these experiences. So a lot of times these like mid-sized startups, middle market type companies, they're looking to, more than anything, not make any major mistakes with their vendor selection. So they want to minimize their risk and then maximize their flexibility and their optionality.
So we've touched a little bit on software. We're actually really kind of talked a lot about kind of tech and software, but are there any other sectors that you're involved in, any manufacturing or even sales or anything like that?
So we're, I'd say, maybe industry agnostic, and there's functions or roles that we really specialize in. So you hit it. IT is a big part of what we cover. We'll also do marketing, call center, customer service, VA type roles. But I'd say 80% plus the demand is software developers, DevOps, QA, things like that. Probably the only thing we don't touch are executive roles. And I don't think anybody's going to Latin America, although we'd be happy to provide it. Nobody's really looking at Latin America for junior people, like right out of school. They're looking for the arbitrage. They can get a senior person in Latin America for the cost of a junior person in the US.
So let me ask you this, because you've been at this for a while. What were some of the hard lessons that you learned as you first kind of ventured out this direction?
I think there's maybe two, and I wouldn't say this is necessarily about nearshoring. This is just founder lessons across the board. The first is my technically my first true entrepreneurial experience was this kind of HR consulting company when I was in San Francisco for about a year in between tech startups that I worked at. And I remember the first couple months I was spending way too much time on like the grammar of my website and researching, should it be an S corp or a C corp or whatever. And really what I should have done is get customers. That's what you need. You need customers. You don't have a business unless you have a customer. And that's usually the first thing I'll tell people is, no, stop paralyzing yourself with all this other nonsense. Go get a customer. The second thing I'd say is when it's your own money, you're going to care a lot more. And like, I'm glad I had raised money and I worked for a bunch of tech startups that had raised some money. So I have exposure to that world, but I think there's something exciting about putting your own money at risk, and you probably make better decisions because of it. I think I've maybe made some careless decisions when it wasn't my own money at stake. And by the way, I've also made plenty of bad decisions with my own money at stake. But I feel way more accountable when it's my own money, because if I make a dumb hire or make a bad mistake, I hear about it at home. That's could have gone for the kids' tuition or something like that.
Yeah, I fully understand that. It always they always say spend the company's money as if it's your own. And I always, having come from working in big organizations, I always found it funny that when people went on a business trip, man, they had to stay in a nice place and go out to nice places to eat. And then when you hear about their family vacation, it's all about like, budgeting and saving money and going on
Yeah.
the cheap. And I'm like, that's kind of the contrast you see in a lot of things is you really got to find a way to take that to heart. The big corporations, most especially, are really bad about controlling costs at times. So when you think about how you've moved to where you are and what you're doing, the folks that you're working with, we talked about some of those challenges that you dealt with, and maybe even some of the money things as well. But what do you see as right now one of the biggest, or maybe even the biggest potential for untapped realities in the areas that you're working?
So the big thing on everybody's mind is AI, but I want to go one level deeper, because we've talked a lot about labor arbitrage with Latin America. And then, of course, AI, the big saying today is you're not going to lose your job to AI. You're going to lose your job to somebody who's using AI. And I think sometimes we have blinders on, like only people in America are using ChatGPT and all these other tools. They're global now. I really encourage our customers, anybody listening, to hire people in Latin America that are using AI, and you're getting what I think is like double bonus arbitrage. And it's like a 20x return. It's incredible.
It's interesting. AI, I use it often. I've been using it daily for over 2 years now. And it's gotten better, certainly better than when it first landed, and I was just tinkering with it. It has gotten better, but it's still work. It's it's like collaborating with someone that you're both trying to figure something else, figure something out at the same time. And if you can put yourself in that place where, like, if you were to say, hey, let's start a business, and you have someone who's a little bit of equal caliber than you, and you start asking each other all these questions. The thing is that AI can quickly become an echo chamber. It's not a good critical thinker. So if you're not there to monitor, to make sure you're not going to go off the rails, it will take you off the rails.
Yeah. There's something that I just discovered about a month ago. I think I'm late to the party here, but I changed the settings on my ChatGPT. Be more direct, contradict me, push back on me, because for about a year it was, wow, that's a smart question, Brian. Yeah. Wow, you're really in tune to be thinking about it like this. And I'm like, wow, I'm so smart. But you need to make sure that you're in with objective, sober AI, not AI that's just trying to flatter you all day.
Yeah, it's we often talk in the US about, the value of college. And what we're finding is that there's a lot of places there's in business where maybe we got a little too excited about you have to have a degree, right? And I think people are finding out that there's a lot you can do without a degree. And I will say this, I 100% support that. I don't think everybody has to have a degree. However, what college provides is somebody who isn't your family, your friend, your spouse, or whatever, who will give you an objective counterpoint to the point that you're trying to make, and will force you to think more critically, and will force you to become a better thinker, and ultimately, hopefully, thought leader, than if you just kind of are in this echo chamber, like you mentioned with ChatGPT, of people just kind of saying, "Oh, wow, that's amazing!" Like, imagine, like, we always talk about that person who's became famous, and now they're surrounded by people who just don't tell them no. They don't know how to act or fit in. Sometimes school is really good for that, right? Being able to challenge your ideas and push against your preconceived notions.
Yeah, something, maybe just a small detour, but on that topic, is something I didn't really talk about with Latin America that fits right into this topic, is call them passionate, call them whatever, but they will disagree with you. They will push back on you. They will say, that's a terrible idea for a tech stack. You should do this. And you don't get that all over the world. I'd argue if your team was in India or the Philippines, just because of the laws of hierarchy there in the culture, they might think you're doing the dumbest thing ever, but you'll never know. You'll never hear about that. So I appreciate the passion and the pushback that I get.
Yeah, I think but that is a really important thing to be aware of, is that, from an American business standpoint, the one thing that we tend to be very much is we're very individualistic, we're very individual driven. And that is a trait that does flow through Latin America as well. When you go to parts of Asia, it's more of a team-oriented approach. And we're not going to rock the boat. We're going to go along to get along, because we don't want to stand out.
Yeah.
Right? And that can, to your point, be very challenging, especially if you're trying to get something to work and you want that pushback. You need that kind of critical voice to say, is this the best way to get it done?
Yeah. And culturally, even if you request that from your team in Asia, it's so unnatural that I think they're like, he doesn't really mean that, does he?
Or the fact that you're just in a position of power. You mentioned it before, the hierarchy. Because of where you sit in the hierarchy, they may not feel comfortable about saying no or challenging your idea. They'll just figure out a way to get what you want done, even if it's maybe not the best way to do it. Totally. Time zone wise, great. Cost wise, not necessarily as inexpensive as parts of Asia, but still good value. The workforce integrity, the stick-to-itiveness, the grit, really strong. There's a lot of positives we've pulled out. What are some of the things that, if you haven't gone down this road before, what are some things that you need to be prepared for that might be different from your experience of offshore?
So it's not a people trait. It's still a institutional risk that I'd say. Maybe two things that I'll talk, and I'll focus this on Argentina because that's where I've had a lot of my firsthand experience. The first issue is, and remember, I was going to try to be an expat in Singapore, where it's about as black and white, no corruption. You can start a business in 4 hours. And the other side of the world, Argentina, it was the most ambiguous, gray area I have ever experienced in my life. And I hired an attorney who had spent time in New York and was obviously local there. I guarantee he wasn't just trying to inflate his billable hours. It's
a very bureaucratic.
Very bureaucratic, but also just like by the grace of God type things. We'll get this paperwork approved by the grace of God. What do you mean? You either do it correctly or you don't. No, not there. It's very cross your fingers and hope for the best, and no matter how much you prepare for it and do everything properly. The other thing is, again, it's not a people thing, it's a system. And I think the US has this. There are states that are known for being amazing to do business in. And you got to think about it. Are you on the founder side or the employer side or the employee side? Somebody's going to win, right? California, probably a very pro-employee state. Wyoming, Texas, maybe pro-employer. Argentina is about as pro-employee as you can get. So you can get yourself into trouble. This rarely happened to me, but it wasn't a non-zero situation where people can go on medical leave or sick leave, and it's probably not as legitimate as you'd hope, and you're paying their salary for a year, or these really long severance payments, or people can get like locked in to long-term employment, where I think as we're used to it in the US, you hear terms like hire slow, fire fast, get the wrong people off the bus. And it's fairly easy to do that, even in these pro-employee states. Um, but Latin America, just make sure you know all the rules and all the laws. It doesn't prevent you from getting bit, but at least you know where the blind spots are.
Yeah, that's a really important point. So I imagine you've developed a pretty good vetting process for this, because clearly I don't think that, and I'm just going to guess from the time that you first arrived in Argentina, probably were not aware of the kind of process that you needed to implement to kind of weed out the good candidates from the bad. And as somebody who's on that HR side of things, boy, that's critical. Right? So what are, without giving away, because look, I think that is very valuable, so I'm not asking you to give up any gold here. However, what are some of the myths, if you're a US company thinking about going into Argentina, that you have found a little bit dispelled now, given your
Well,
experience?
let me maybe take that more macro, and just like a common misnomer that a lot of companies have about, I was going to say Latin America, but it's probably worldwide, is we tend to be very like ethnocentric, and our way is best, and only the best talent is in the US or even in our own little city. But what that also often leads to this kind of thinking is, these other guys in this other country, they're low cost resources, right? So they're not treated or thought of like people, that have families and ambitions and hopes and dreams and skills and things they're working on, and all the things that we as human beings, and it's just a big mistake. So I'd really encourage, if you were going to hire people in other countries, just remember that, and don't forget.
Yeah, you're
Yeah,
hiring
yeah,
people.
don't forget that. It's just so easy to, we've got these low cost resources, and they're just thought of as the other guys in wherever country they're at.
I've mentioned this before to friends and whatnot. I hate the term
Yeah.
human resources because it marginalizes people. I think when you look at people as just a resource, like you would any sort of raw material commodity that you use in business to transform into something that you need and throw away when you're done, that is what that term just kind of like sits with me at. So I love the fact that you're saying, no, these aren't just resources. These are people with lives, with families who, look, at the end of the day, we're all trying to get do just a little bit better than where we've been, right? We all just want a little bit more. We're all trying to build wealth, safety, security for our family, and it's no different no matter where you go. So I love the fact that you have that perspective that these are people with lives that they want to build. One thing I want to ask you about is that as you look at as you look to the future, because as you mentioned in our recent history, especially with the tariff thing, it really kind of added a little disruption, because it's not just a tariff on goods, it can also be a tariff on talent. What do you see as the next several years kind of unfolding? Because we've whenever we think about international resources, like looking at like where can we find talent globally, a lot of the time we focus on Asia, on that half of the world, and Latin America doesn't seem to come up as often. So what do you see as the future for this segment of the world, and where the US can do better?
Yeah, great question. I think there's a couple things there. So I brought up Singapore, and the reason I want to talk about them again is Singapore is a very rich country that we talk a lot about. Are we going to buy this or build this? And Singapore tried to buy their way into a tech startup capital. And I don't think it really worked, no matter how deep their pockets were, or how many subsidies and grants they gave other tech startups, because you still need the people who've grinded and gritted their way and they've recycled into that ecosystem, either more capital or more knowledge or more advice. So you still need that no matter where you look in the world. You can't just buy it. And there are a lot of upcoming talent markets and other markets going through distress, and it's all cycles. Nearshoring is a relative term. If you happen to live in Australia and your team is in the Philippines, you're nearshoring. Just like we think about the US nearshoring to Latin America. If you're in UK, you nearshore to Eastern Europe. But Eastern Europe it's sad to say, but with everything going on with the war there, it's a shaky place to do business. Africa is exciting. The Zuckerberg Chan Foundation has been sending a lot of money there, trying to one of the fastest growing countries and economies in the world is Nigeria. But again, like, it's going to take time. This population needs to get the experience, and then they mentor, they recycle, and it's not just exporting, but they have to create their own companies too. Vietnam is kind of surpassing a lot of other countries just on a growth trajectory. The Philippines has been a talent pocket for customer service and call center, but no matter how much they try to break into software, it doesn't seem like that's really getting going. And then I'll talk about India, because India is the belly of the beast, the largest services outsourcing country really in the world, and it's been like that forever. Something happened recently, and as you bring up tariffs, the H-1B visa is something that's on a lot of people's minds. So for a long time, there's a quota of about 65,000 H-1B visas that were released every year, and you had to apply for that. Pretty low friction to get it, about $3,000 as long as you won the lottery. Where did most of those visas go? They went to Indian consulting companies, Tata, Infosys, Cognizant, companies like that. And they played the game really well. It was very similar to indentured servitude, where they'd bring engineers over, work for large, not even necessarily tech companies, but companies that had technical operations, needed to do maintenance work, integration work. So a lot of native born Americans were shut out of a lot of that work. And that was really going to Indian immigrants on H-1B visas. So what's happened recently? That $3,000 initiation fee is now $100,000. And I don't know about you, but I'm not going to spend $100K on somebody's visa just to do maintenance on legacy code. I maybe will do that if I'm OpenAI and I'm looking all over the world for the best R&D and data scientists, AI engineers, but certainly not for maintenance on code or roles that maybe are a dime a dozen. So India is being shut out. Not every country has that experience. American engineers that are new computer science grads don't really want to do that work. They want to do hot new stuff, be full stack developers, at tech startups. So who's going to do all that? I think it's going to be Latin America. I think in politics, there's always winners and losers. And sometimes you're up, sometimes you're down. But I think policy decisions, like China's on the bad guy list right now. So if you're a manufacturing company, Latin America looks really good. Mexico looks really good for supply chain. auto companies. And if you're in services, especially white collar services, tech, India's kind of on the bad guy list now. And as they're losing at the moment, all this stuff could change tomorrow. But as they're losing
Oh,
at the
sure.
moment, Latin
Yeah.
America has wind in their sails right now.
There's so many things that you mentioned there that are such really good points. First off, that this is kind of policy
Mhm.
at the moment, and as we've seen, things will change, can change, rather quickly. But when you think about, and I've seen just where I'm at. You mentioned your partners in Atlanta. I happen to be in Atlanta as well, and you've seen just going around town, things are very different. It's as if like a large portion of the population is just, you know, they've gone on or gone somewhere, right? It's kind of strange in a little bit, but I think to your point, I think we had a lot of folks here who were working for other companies, and those companies are just not renewing their
Mhm.
stay here, which makes it very difficult. One of the other things you mentioned, though, was around
Mhm.
Nigeria, right? So I do a lot of teaching, and I can tell you, my Nigerian students, some of the best, some of the sharpest, most grittiest students that I have, and it gets me to thinking that if you get the government right and you get the infrastructure right, um, there are parts of Africa that are just going to blow up. And in many
Yeah.
ways, it is already. There's a lot of great coders and a lot of great developers that are coming out of that
Yeah.
part of the world. But as the other countries around Nigeria kind of see that and it spreads a little bit, Africa is going to be a continent to reckon with. I mean, they have all of the potential that a China has, but again, got to get the infrastructure and the government stability stuff right. And when they
Yeah.
do, man, watch out. They're going to be
Yeah, I
big.
totally agree. I think it's something where none of this happens overnight. It feels like we're just talking about Latin America, but this is like 30 years in the making.
Yeah.
China, India, had looked totally different in the 80s. The 2000s have been their century. Um, Africa needs some time to develop, but all the potential in the world.
Yeah, and to that point, even it's interesting to me when you think about, Brazil had the Olympics not too long ago, but outside of that, like, we there's almost like this whole world south of Mexico that um, we don't really popularize
Mm.
as much here, right? We know so much more about Europe and Asia and that half of the world. There's just a lot, not just a lot to learn, but there's a lot of potential in those parts of the world. I think it's just going to be tremendous. It's a great
I
opportunity.
agree.
Brian, so as we think about the work you're doing, which by the way, I love this topic. I love the fact that you're doing so much work in that area, and I think Tim Ferriss is also one of those guys who's very fond of
Yeah.
Buenos Aires
Yes.
and Argentina, and talks
Like
about it
world
quite a bit.
champion tango dancer.
Right. But yeah, it's like his favorite place if I'm not mistaken, I think he's kind of settled into that
Oh,
part of the
did he?
world as
Okay.
well.
Okay. I didn't know.
But I could be wrong on that. Don't fact check me on that. But Brian, when we think about getting in touch with you, getting in touch with your company to explore this a little bit more, you have a podcast. Also, you guys talk about this
All the
stuff a
time.
lot. Let's talk a little bit more about how people find you, get in touch with you,
Yeah, thank
connect with
you.
you.
Two places. If you're just interested in consuming more about this world, you can see the sign in the background, the Nearshore Cafe podcast. And the website is nearshorecafepodcast.com. We're about 75 episodes in, and all we do is talk about the stories and the people that are doing business in Latin America. Could be a VP of software engineering in Chicago that hired a team in Brazil and how it all came together. Or it could be a fintech entrepreneur in Lima that is building something interesting, and we want to show that this work gets done there too. It's not just a San Francisco or Atlanta or New York thing. And then if you'd like to talk more to us about where should I put my team, I have this constraint, this budget, this is what we do all day long. And that's Plug Technologies, plugg.tech.
Awesome. Well, Brian, thank you so much for your time. Folks, thank you all for checking out DissedMedia, A Startup Story. Thanks again for checking out another wonderful episode. And please remind your friends, your family, maybe even people you don't like but want them to hear our podcast. Go over to the Daily Pitch. Check out the website. Give us a like. Give us a share. Let us share some love of this with others that you know. But thanks, everybody, for checking this out. We hope you will be back next time. Until then, have a good one. We'll see you later. Thanks for listening to DissedMedia, A Startup Story. This podcast was produced and edited by Ben Olmos and is a production of DissedMedia Corporation. If you're interested in learning more about anything you heard on this episode, please reach out to us at podcast@DissedMedia.com. You can also get more information about this and other episodes or information about our guests by checking out dailypitch.news, our business and insights publication focused on helping managers, leaders, and entrepreneurs get better at what they do.